What's the difference between your videos and movies on the big screen? The core of all cinematography begins with pointing the camera at someone. If you can't even make that look good, what hope is there for a feature film? These are the fundamentals to master if you want your images to look cinematic. Audiences gravitate towards watching people, meaning it's difficult to have a story without actors. I reject the notion that something as basic as a travel vlog can't have some form of narrative. During the editing process, it can be tempting to make a montage of all your best clips contrasted over 30 seconds. But as trendy as it may seem, I don't personally find this to resemble cinema. That's why in my glorified vlogs, I strive to preserve continuity by presenting clips in the chronological order they were filmed. Similarly, sequencing your scenes from light to dark can also emulate the natural passage of time. Flow and pacing are another aspect of the editing process, which is a topic of debate. I'd argue that catering toward low attention spans with quick edits is not a rewarding long-term play. You can still maintain visual interest through longer cuts by focusing on composition and camera movement instead. For icing on the cake, consider adding some narration or title sections to make the project more cohesive as a whole. When filming a subject, you should take several things into consideration, like which angles look best for them. Shooting at an upward angle will make anyone look more charismatic than head-on. Even if you use wide lenses, try inching closer to make the subject more compelling. Handheld footage generates a lot of energy through movement, but mixing it up with stationary shots can also allow you to compose stable, deliberate scenes. I always remind my talent to not look at the lens, as movies don't usually break the fourth wall. Shooting from behind or the side can allow for a more immersive perspective when exploring new locations. You can also direct your subject to interact with the environment, as long as it's an action a person would actually do in that situation. Just anything other than intentionally posing for the camera, as this isn't a photo shoot. Add some variety by incorporating shots of hands and legs, relevant objects, and scenery. I like to think of the process as a documentary rather than contextual portraiture, which is why I often don't tell Chili precisely when I'm rolling in order to get more candid shots. People always freeze up when they know you're recording. If you don't have someone to shoot, you can still record beautiful footage by filming flowers, clouds, shadows, or whatever you find aesthetic. As long as it's something you enjoy filming, your audience should feel the same. Location scouting is an essential aspect of modern cinematography, capable of making your background into a set. You could have the most expensive camera in someone's backyard, and it still wouldn't look as good as iPhone footage in Iceland. However, discovering a cinematic location isn't necessarily exclusive to exotic destinations. Your best footage isn't always going to be of famous landmarks, but often charming countrysides and abandoned buildings instead. I would even say having your subject being the only person in the frame is a bigger priority than a shot at an iconic spot if it would be swarmed with tourists. Shallow depth of field is useful to blur out unwanted bystanders, but stopping down has higher visual potential if everything in the shot is perfect. There are many ways to frame a scene, all of which vary situation to situation. Symmetry should always be on your radar, but I'd argue that center framing can get boring very quickly. If you like how I compose my images, try the rule of fifths for 2.39 CinemaScope and position your subject near the edges. I'm not sure why more filmmakers don't know about this and constantly regurgitate the same photography techniques. Rule of thirds may look great for open gate and 16:9, but it's not the only framing guide, so go out and experiment. Even if you climb to the top of a mountain, it won't look impressive under the harsh sun at noon. Lighting is the most cinematic tool at our disposal and can turn an ordinary setting into a dynamic one. I've been an adamant proponent of natural light in previous videos, and I'd argue it's easier to manage than people realize, since all you need is a working clock and weather app. The softest lighting is typically at sunset, blue hour, or in the rain, which is even powerful enough to make a garbage rag look cinematic. but recently I find myself enamored with the challenges of daylight. If you're like me, you're mostly traveling after lunch, and you should constantly be on the lookout for scenarios to manipulate the afternoon light. Depending on the height of your urban architecture or landscapes, you can capitalize on the blistering 3 p.m. sun by identifying long shadows and bounced light, which can elegantly poke through mountains, buildings, and trees. This might be your only window to capture something beautiful, because before you know it, you're hungry, eating dinner, and magic hour lighting is gone. If you can't find any shadows, try searching indoors for open ceilings and windows, or make your own by having your subject wear a hat for stronger contrast ratio on their body. Sunlight isn't the only way to add color to your scene. Clothing and props are an effective yet simple way to spice things up. This really deserves a dedicated video in itself, as the right attire can do wonders in making your pictures feel more purposeful. Although I prefer monochromatic color palettes, wearing a bold color like yellow or red allows your images to pop even in the most mundane situations. Color contrast is particularly relevant when you want your subject to stand out amidst desaturated overcast skies or blue hour. If you are filming at night, you'd ideally prefer to have your subject wear lighter colors so they won't dissolve into the darkness. Same with wearing green in a forest. Yellow or navy blue would be a more striking choice. Your environment does matter, with saturated hues excelling at the beach and darker tones in urban cities. Some combinations are particularly complementary with each other, meaning you can consider apparel based on skin and hair color. Color theory is by no means solved, but I think green is more compatible on blondes or people with brown eyes, blue or white on people with darker skin, and red and brown on people with lighter skin. Yellow is always cinematic to me. You do have to be careful when wearing some hues like blue, black, red, and white, with some shades more prone to clipping and oversaturation. Every time I film with Chili, we discuss which outfit she'll wear based on where we're going, the weather, and time of day. Color grading begins before you leave the house, and if you do it tastefully, you might not need that fancy grade. Sometimes all it takes is a cool jacket or accessory to complete the scene. Props can also add motivation to an otherwise directionless vlog, even if it's pretending to take a phone call, sitting sadly in thought, or inspecting an object, which are all infinitely more interesting than standing there doing nothing. It's the small details that separate average from cinematic. As your cinematography improves, nothing is quite as offensive as bad audio. After a certain visual threshold, poor sound quality will stick out by comparison and make even the best pictures unwatchable. Whether it is music, voiceover, or sound design, audio sets a mood and tone where visuals can't. Never underestimate the power of a little scratch audio or Foley with rain, footsteps, birds, or trains to enhance your images. In the age of music libraries, I often see videos derailed solely because of a track with contradictory mood and tempo. It doesn't have to be perfectly in sync like a music video, but I'd suggest matching any climaxes of a piece to a highlight point. As any narrative becomes increasingly complex, so do the musical sensibilities. Less is usually more, as is my preference for minimalistic ambiance. A soundtrack should never eclipse the story and only elevate it. I always recommend creating your own compositions, as uninspiring stock music frequently fails to capture the specific tone I'm going for. I've created a video on how easy it can be to score a cinematic theme, but if you don't want to bother, I've permitted CleverG soundtracks to be freely used for non-commercial videos under a Creative Commons license as long as it's credited. If you want to monetize or access my full catalog and monthly new soundtracks, I've made it all available for download on Patreon. Don't skip out on leg day, and don't skimp out on music. If wardrobe are the sprinkles, audio is a cherry on top. Without them, all you have is an ice cream. Without the image making, you're left with just the colorful condiments. This tasty metaphor is all to say, each one of these ingredients is indispensable when creating a cinematic sundae. Cinematography is no longer just about producing pretty pictures. The days of dialogue-motivated cinematography are over, as merely pointing the camera at the person talking will be duller than any clinical lens you'd be critical about. Visual storytelling is about reimagining an experience and bringing the audience along for the ride. If you can manage to make a vlog resemble a film, imagine what you could scale on a movie budget. Every armchair filmmaker wants to share their opinion on what looks cinematic, but ultimately, the only way we know for sure is by going out there and actually doing it. It's not about how big or small, it's your passion that brings your images to life.